Hello and welcome back. This is Death and Taxes, the podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and joined, as always, by Gene Tunny. Gene, how you doing?
Generally well, John. You know that I'm an optimistic person. However, this week, I must say, has tested me a bit with all of the revelations of depravity and evil with the Epstein files. And now in Australia, we find that, well, it's shock. We can't trust our leaders either. There was a commitment that they wouldn't change particular tax settings, or there wasn't any. There weren't any noises about it during the election campaign. But now it turns out that they're considering changes to capital gains tax and potentially negative gearings. Well, we could for discussion later. But yes, a big shock. So we're going to talk about that a bit later, I expect. And how have you been?
Well, yes, not too bad. As I was telling you just before we came live, we've had the first homegrown animals on our little farm. A bunch of chicks born and on the cusp of death. So I've spent the afternoon holding 1 day old very little chickens up to the heat lamp in the bathroom, trying to keep them alive. So that's a little bit of a different adventure. But look, Can I just ask? You mentioned Epstein. I got to make a terrible admission. I haven't followed it too closely. I've seen a lot of people commenting on it, but I haven't gone through any of the files. Is there something there that we're supposed to have seen? It seems to me like they're trying to drown us in so much documentation that it's nearly impossible to tell the wheat from the chaff. But have you seen anything that stands out?
I think they are discovering the damning revelations, right? So this could bring down Keir Starmer, for one. Because of the revelations about Peter Mandelson, just how close, former Minister of the Crown and in the UK was to Epstein, and how he was giving out government secrets, giving Epstein advance notice of bailouts, of assistance to the banks in the UK, potentially market-sensitive information. It just extraordinary. So Peter Mandelson is now under criminal investigation for that. I mean, Peter Mandelson, big name of the Blair government. I mean, someone whose judgment's been called into question twice before. He's had to resign for different scandals. And why Keir Starmer appointed him ambassador to the US, I've got no idea. And so Keir Starmer's government is, like, his position is under threat. We've seen revelations about various public figures. Peter Attia, the longevity expert, who's well known amongst all of the sort of, millennials, the Gen Xers, the Tim Ferriss types. He's had to, admit, I'm really sorry. I had an association with Epstein. I was sending all of these lewd emails to him. There's no allegation that he's participated in any of the really depraved stuff, but just the emails look so bad, and he's lost a gig with CBS that he got. So look, I mean, there's going to be more and more that comes out. What we see is that, Epstein's part of, this, and we don't know for sure, but it looks like there's some global compromise, compromat operation going on to get compromising material on world leaders, on influential people, for either money for Epstein, or worst case for a foreign government. Or, I mean, who knows? I mean, assuming it's not an internal operation in the US, but I mean, it's just mind blowing what this involves, John.
Yes, I believe Kash Patel said a certain Middle Eastern country may be involved, but we will not mention any Middle Eastern countries' names for self-preservation reasons. The thing that stands out to me in this situation is, weren't we just told black and blue last year there are no Epstein files? So I haven't gone through it. I don't know what's in there. Look, I got to say, I tend to suspect that a lot of the stuff in there, some emails have shown up on my social media feed, but I suspect a lot of people are getting condemned by associations that might have just been, I've met a lot of people. I've sent a lot of emails to people that I'm not close to. It doesn't mean I've been to their house and partaken in their dodgy habits. So a lot of people are getting caught up here, and I suspect there's a lot of a lot of smoke, and I don't know where the fire is. But the one thing that's certain is there certainly are Epstein files. Right, that seems obvious now. So why were we being told last year that there are no Epstein files? That seems bizarre to me.
I think they wanted. I think they wanted to cover it up because they're so, or not let it get out because it's so damaging. And I think it's damaging to both sides of politics in the US, right? I mean, a lot of senior figures on both sides are damaged by this, it just really, it raises questions about the ethics, about the morality of, I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but, not to ever expect too much of people in those positions, but it raises all sorts of questions. And people are talking about, well, hang on, we can't reform the system. You need to burn the whole thing down. I mean, not that I'm advocating that, but, just for the record.
Oh, you're getting us in trouble now. Come on, Gene. They've just passed the new hate group laws. We're going to be targeted.
Yeah. I mean, I'll have the police. I mean, I'm just saying that's what people are saying at the moment because they're so shocked by it. And it is. So there are serious revelations in it, and I think there are going to be more to come.
Yes. May well be. Anyway, that wasn't one of our core topics for the day, but it is very interesting and it's something that's happened. So thank you for the sidetrack. But just everyone listening along at home, this is live. So you will see it as we say it, mistakes and all. This is being simulcast on the ATA channel on YouTube, the ATA channel on Facebook, and my personal channel on X. So wherever you are there, please like and share and follow. And please also duck around to the other ones. Go around and check out the ATA pages on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, and my personal accounts on X and YouTube and Rumble, and Gene's accounts on X and LinkedIn, and I don't know what else you've got, Gene, but wherever you find good, wherever good solid economists are found, you will find Gene. So go give us a like and a follow on all of those places. It helps the algorithm to know that you want to see this stuff. And we do take comments, as you saw before, with Lyndon saying hello. Hello, Lyndon. We take comments and questions. We mostly leave them to the end, but if there's something particularly scintillating and we see it, we could get interrupted. So please feel free to give us your thoughts. So a few things we're going to look at today. We are going to talk soon about, of course, Gene's going to do his wrap-up, his roundup, as he always does. We are going to look at some of these sin taxes that are becoming more sinful or more taxful. One of those ways, right? So petrol taxes are up, alcohol taxes are up. We'll look at that. And then the big one that Gene's already given a hint to, the government now looks like they want to increase the capital income tax, specifically capital gains tax, which allows us to talk about all capital income tax, because I'll take the license to talk about what I want. But anyway, that could be on the agenda, and I think that is a dangerously bad idea, depending what they plan on doing, of course, which we don't know yet. So we're going to talk capital tax, we're going to talk sin taxes, we're going to talk the economic roundup. But first, let's start with having a brief review of the politics for this week. So a few things have happened. It hasn't been quite as exciting as the last couple of weeks, because the last couple of weeks were probably a little bit too exciting for the good of the nation, politically speaking. But we have seen this ongoing. People have been calling it an implosion, but I think someone pointed out that it's more like an explosion. All the pieces are going outwards, not inwards. So this political explosion of one nation, liberal, national, conservative, moderate, et cetera, and that has gone on. We've seen one more defection, Corey Bernardi, although I think Giles from the Northern Territory has just quit the Country Liberal Party, so he may be going to One Nation as well. And we've seen Pauline Hanson return to the Senate today. She's been banned for 2 months. And of course, the Liberal and National parties continue to be split. But in all of this milieu, Gene, what have you seen, or what can you unpack for us in the world of politics?
Well, I think the right side of politics in Australia it's a disaster at the moment. And I mean, Pauline Hanson is now saying, well, she could, lead a coalition of all the right-wing parties. I still don't think that's enough. If she's going to be the one who has to lead it, I can't see how it'll work, and I don't think they'll be able to beat Labor at the next election. I mean, it's an absolute, it's a disaster for that side of politics. So yeah, I don't know how it's going to be sorted out. But I mean, John, still, I think the biggest story, like you said it was uneventful. I mean, this Epstein thing is just absolutely huge and mind blowing, and really makes you think about just how the world runs. I mean, you really have to start questioning assumptions. I mean, I'm not generally a sort of David Icke or a Alex Jones type, but you know what I mean. You start wondering about just, are these people completely devoid of any morality? But then people who should know better, like you said, well, there's no guilt. You shouldn't have guilt by association. Okay, generally I agree with you. However, it was well known from the late 2000s that we've just lost John, but I'll keep talking. That it was well known since the late 2000s that Jeffrey Epstein was essentially doing all of these terrible things to underage women. And it's just, we've got prominent people associating with Epstein and people who are just incredibly surprising. So, I mean, one of the biggest, strangest things, you think you're in this bizarro reality, is you see photos of Noam Chomsky on a plane with Jeffrey Epstein, which makes absolutely no sense in any rational world. And so I think, and also Peter Attia, who's well known as a longevity expert, very shocking to people. I think we've got John coming up on the other side.
I have no idea if you can hear me at the moment, but
yes, we can hear you. We just can't see you. But John, I was just saying how shocking it is, like the guilt by association thing, and I think some of the people should be considered. They should have known better because he'd already been convicted, and people, you just can't fathom why someone like Noam Chomsky would be associated with Jeffrey Epstein. It just doesn't make sense in any rational world. So yeah, I'm still blown away by all of those revelations and those files, and just wondering where this will land. It's clearly the biggest political scandal since, I don't know what. I mean, probably since Watergate. I think it's bigger than Watergate. It's just absolutely incredible.
Look, there's a lot of truth in that, although I think one thing that puts it in some context potentially is why does everybody know this man? I think he was a money launderer. So if anybody had income and they were trying to ensure that they weren't paying too much tax on it, or they needed to move large amounts of money across borders, then it would make sense to know him, and it doesn't necessarily imply the rest of the Epstein Island stuff. Although look, I'm sure dodgy stuff happened as well. But I think potentially the story here is how many people are just skirting around the rules of the system that they all make us follow.
Yes,
because it seems clear to me that he was a money launderer, right? So he was there's people who need to move large amounts of money between countries, and you can't just go to the bank and ask them to do it. So you need some sort of dodgy, well-connected people to help you do it. And it seems pretty clear from his connections that he sort of played that role. He also went from someone who didn't really have any great skill set, except that they said he was very good at working out ways to not pay tax. And then suddenly extremely rich people started putting him on planes, flying him back and forth between people who were moving very large amounts of money. All of that says to me he's a money launderer and a person who helps you avoid paying tax, which then explains why a lot of very rich and powerful people wanted to know him, potentially.
Yeah, but I mean, he targeted them. He threw parties. He gave them access to young women. So look, it looks like it was a deliberate strategy. I mean, I'm very much convinced it was part of an intelligence operation with the aim of compromise, of blackmail. For I don't know who. I don't think there's sufficient evidence of that. I mean, we can guess based on what we know about the people involved, but it's all still speculative at this time. Are we going to be able to see you, John?
Well, I was thinking I might, when you start your roundup, I'm going to drop down and log out and log back in because I've been trying to fix this camera. Why don't we do that now? We'll come back and talk politics maybe a little bit after that if there's the more of the politics of it. I did have one thing to say about the nature of the upcoming politics, because you're always trying to think of what's something that hasn't already been said on Sky News. And the one thing I think that could be interesting here is we've got a South Australian state election coming up in less than 2 months. And I think that's really going to be a potentially interesting trigger point in unpacking and understanding where this Liberal versus National versus One Nation game is. Right now, we're all talking opinion polls. That's a real touch grass chance to find out what's happening. And I think that it could end up having quite unexpected and strange consequences. But I'll talk about that in a second. Why don't I throw to you for Gene's roundup at the moment? I'll take that opportunity to drop out, and then come back in and hope that my camera is, well, there you go.
Are you back?
There was something spooky there. Can you see me?
No, you're still black, or your screen's still black. But why don't I'll just jump into the, I know it looks like you might be coming on. There you are. Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Good to see you.
I apologize to everybody at home. I don't apologize for dropping out. I apologize for making you have to see me again because, but yeah, no avoiding me. You're stuck with me now. So,
well, we can keep talking politics.
Now that you can see my face, let me finish this point about the South Australian election, if you will indulge me. Now, there are no recent state polls from South Australia, so we have no idea what's going to happen. So it could be anything. And the federal polls in South Australia show a wide range of outcomes. But there could be a chance that the Liberal Party is nearly wiped out here, or is overtaken by One Nation to be the main right-wing party in the South Australian state parliament, right? So that the thing that we're looking at that could happen federally in 2 years might happen in South Australia within 2 months. So that's a very interesting moment to look at. But the second reason that this is going to be interesting to watch, and I do not mean to throw shade at my friends in One Nation. I like Malcolm Roberts. I like Cory Bernardi. I don't really know Pauline. But so I'm not trying to be mean to One Nation here, but they don't have a great track record at keeping all of their people in the party. Right. So in 1998, I think it was 11 or 13 One Nation people were elected to the Queensland Parliament. Within a year or two, they were all gone. Right. And then the next time, I think 3 or 4 more got elected, and some of those were gone. Most of their senators have quit the party. Their South Australian MPs quit the party. They've had 3 MPs in New South Wales recently. They've all quit the party. It is a running theme of One Nation. And I'm not saying this because I'm saying, ha. It's not a good thing that this happens. It just is a thing that this happens, that they haven't consistently had a core thing that brought them all together and kept them all together and allowed some people to put their egos behind them so they could follow a leader. They haven't historically done well at that. So there is a very real chance that there is a big amount of wind in One Nation sails now, because at the moment they haven't really got the opportunity to have that falling out. If in South Australia you suddenly had 10 or 15 or 20 new people elected, and most of these people are going to be people without a big profile, and, dirty little secret about politics to let you know, as soon as you're elected, everybody, as soon as they're elected, thinks, oh, I was secretly a genius all along. I deserve to be here. I am the greatest politician the world has ever seen, and everyone should listen to me. As soon as people are elected, even if they didn't go in like that, within a couple of months, people have convinced them that they are supposed to have an ego that goes along with their position. 20 new people in Parliament with a slightly different vision. I am not saying I hope they fall apart. I'm just saying if history is a guide, there is a chance that there could be problems trying to wrangle those cats, right? So that could be interesting. I've heard it said that perhaps the best thing that could happen to the Liberals is that they get massacred. They get knocked out of the South Australian election. They lose badly in the South Australian election, because that allows everyone to watch what happens next. And that might speed up the difficulties of One Nation and speed up the return of the Liberals. I've heard that said. Look, I hope that's not the case, right? I hope One Nation's able to get their stuff together. I hope they're able to bring together a good team, and that team is able to play well together and not split. But this isn't, I'm not commenting on what I want here. I'm commenting on what could happen. And that's the thing to watch out for. The South Australian election, firstly, watch the results. Secondly, watch for that first 6 months. Does the party stay together? that is going to tell us a lot about what happens over the next 2 years, in my opinion. Any thoughts on that, Gene?
Look, I agree with you. I think definitely what happens in South Australia could send a signal about what's going to happen nationally. I think, I very much agree with that. I mean, my feeling is that I don't think the Liberal Party can recover nationally in its current form. I'm just very skeptical of that. Simply because, I mean, I suppose they can survive, but I don't think they'll recover to be a party of government, at least not in the foreseeable future, and certainly not in the next 5 or 10 years, simply because there's no connection. Young people have no connection with them. Because there are so many people who are swing voters, but the core vote of people who would identify as, and Labor's got the same problem but not to the same extent the Liberals have, like the Gen Zs. Like, what's the vote? The Liberal Party identification? Probably about 10% or something, if that.
I'm going to push back a little bit here. I mean, okay. I'm not pushing back on your data. I think that's right. People often look at the data and they notice the same thing. I don't have it in front of us. You'll have to just take our word for it. The vote for One Nation and the Liberals is better for the boomers and the Gen Xers. The millennials are a bit more evenly split, but it's starting to get better for the Greens. And then with the Zoomers, Generation Z, it's actually, Labor doesn't go up that much. What happens is the Greens go up a lot for the Zoomers and the Liberals go down. So it just makes it a much more left-wing generation. But not because they're going to Labor, interestingly, but because they're with the Greens. And people look at that and they think, this indicates for the future, the Greens are sitting in a good position. Because, the boomers are going to die and these young Greenie voters are going to take over the world. I don't think that's the right interpretation of what's happening there. And Topher talked about this recently on his podcast, The Oddcast. His podcast is called, if anyone wants to go and have a look at that. You can find that on YouTube's and all the other social media places. Yeah. I don't know, I'm always plugging other people. Maybe they can do the same for us. But he made this point. It's a point that we discussed before, and I think it's correct. What we're seeing here isn't that the next generation is going to be more left-wing. It's that young people are more left-wing. And the thing that turns people into conservatives, libertarians, and not everyone, some young people are conservative and some old people are left-wing, but the trigger points in life are when you go through these moments where you take on responsibility. And for a lot of people, that means when you buy a house, when you take on a difficult job, when you get married, when you have kids, especially when you have kids, right? A house, kids, responsibility, those parts of the natural life cycle tend to trigger a change in people where they become less idealistic and utopian about their politics and become a little bit more serious about their politics. And so we've seen this. The boomers started very left-wing. And now the boomers are typically known as the right-wing voters. Gen X started more left-wing than the boomers. Now Gen X is, I think, the biggest cohort for One Nation is Gen X.
Yeah.
The millennials,
and Gen X
talking
women
15
too.
years ago.
Sorry,
15 years ago, we were talking about how millennials were the most left-wing people ever. And now millennials are drifting back towards the center and they're becoming pretty evenly split. And now the Zoomers come on the board and we go, oh, look how left-wing they are. We've seen this play out already, right? This keeps playing out. I think there is a chance that the next generation after the Zoomers, they don't vote yet, but Generation Alpha, my kids, may end up being one of the most right-wing generations we've seen in a long time. Now, that means probably when they start voting, they'll still be slightly to the left. But then as they mature, all of these generations become more right-wing over time. So we're seeing the same data, but the issue is, are we seeing it that the Greens are going to boom because of this, or are these people going to grow out of being Greenies as they get older? And I tend to think it's more likely the latter, but we don't know yet, so I guess we'll wait and see.
But unless there's a great leader who can reinvent the Liberal Party and explain what it's about, I just find it hard to see how they can do it. I mean, there's no one like the party of Menzies and Howard. I mean, you could see a common thread there. I'm just not sure what the common thread is now, or what's actually going to get people motivated to vote for them. I think the whole sort of, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison years were a bit of a disaster for them. I mean, that really looked bad for them. And now they're just a mess. So,
I agree with that. When when I was talking before, I was talking about like the left-right divide. What the right wing looks like, that's a very different thing. And I don't know what that's going to be. And it may well be that what the right wing ends up looking like isn't currently even on the agenda, right? Isn't on the table yet. The traditional Liberal Party, sort of wishy-washy, centre-right, John Howard vibe, I don't think that's the future. I'm not convinced that the future is Pauline yet either. And who knows? Something is stirring, but we don't know what it is yet. So it's going to be interesting to watch it unfold. A lot of the people, the younger people on the online right, would have very strong opinions about what this new right is going to be. But look, and I think that those people are convinced that they are right. They may well be, but I just don't think we know yet. I mean, it is up for grabs what the future of the right is going to be. I've talked about this before. If you look around the world, the establishment right is collapsing everywhere, including the Liberal Party in Australia. That's only recently. But before that, the Republicans in France, they went from having the presidency to being at 5% in an election in a very short amount of time. The mainstream centre-right party in Italy is now the third biggest right-wing party, like the sixth biggest party in the country. They're saying the Tories are being replaced by Farage. AFD's on the rise in Germany. The PVV in the Netherlands briefly took government. This is happening everywhere, but and all of these are kind of seen as insurgent right-wing parties. And it makes sense to say, oh, look, the insurgent right is replacing the establishment right, but they are quite different. Right? I mean, Javier Milei in Argentina is like an insurgent, a non-traditional, non-establishment right-winger, but he is very different to Le Pen from France. I mean, Le Pen is all about, she says we're not the establishment right because we want a much bigger government. And Javier Milei says we're not the establishment right because we think the concept of government is evil and it shouldn't exist and taxation is theft and we should live in an anarcho-capitalist utopia. I mean, those are very different visions for the right, right? I mean, that's two extreme examples. But again, I think you'll find that there is a big difference between Farage and AFD. So it is an open question. I think the establishment right is dying. And that's kind of the point you were made, that the Liberal Party, just why would anyone vote for them anymore? I think that's a good point. The interesting question, and I don't think anyone knows the answer here, and if you're listening at home, please tell us what you think the answer is. We don't yet know what the new right is going to end up looking like. And there is kind of a little battle for the heart and soul of the new right. Like, what does it mean? What are the core values? What is it we're rebelling against? Because I, to some degree, would consider myself kind of a supporter of a Javier Milei version of a new right. So I'm in here fighting for a version of a new right. I have very little time for the establishment, but there is sort of that battle for the heart and soul of the new right. And if you're listening to this at home, please let us know, what do you think it should be? Firstly, do you agree? Do you just want to stick with the establishment right? Because that's one option. It could come back. A lot of people on the Sky News and in the Australian, I keep saying, don't worry, the establishment will come back. But if the establishment falls, what is it? What is the core features of the new right? I'd be very interested to hear what anyone listening along at home has to say about that around Australia. What do you think, Gene? What is putting aside whether you are in the new right, but what do you think the new right could or should be?
And not saying this is necessarily the right way to go about it, but what I think the themes are, it's a yearning to go back to Australia, to an idea of Australia, say from 30 or 40 years ago. I see that, and I think that's what's driven a lot of Gen X to One Nation. We see a lot, if you look on Facebook or Twitter, maybe it's just what I'm looking at, but you see a lot of photos of street corners from the 60s or the 70s of milk bars, of kids on bikes, or kids by the beach and having ice creams. And I think, there's that yearning, that nostalgia to go back to a time people think was much easier, was much better, even though, some of the data would suggest it wasn't. But yet I think, I think it all comes back to we're just reeling from the very high rate of immigration that has just, caused all sorts of strain, pushed up house prices, causing significant congestion, concerns about crime in our cities. I think a lot of it is a reaction to that. But, the way we're going, I think a strong theme is going to be a return to Australia as it once was. You could say that some of these. Maybe there's some ethno-nationalism there. Look, I think that's going to be one of the strong themes, and that's what's attracting people to One Nation at the moment.
We had a comment in here from, I don't know how to say this person's name, but hopes for hasty, but the future might be Malay plus Hansen. I'm not exactly sure what Malay plus Hansen would look like as a mix. But I think you hit the nail on the head a bit earlier when you say that immigration is at the center of it. I think that is the one consistent theme you can see running through all of the versions of the new right. Now, exactly what that means, what take you have on it, and what else you add to it, that's open for debate. But I would put it down to this. I think the motivating feature is the frustration people have at the very real loss of culture and community. That's the way I would put it. People feel like they are losing the culture and community that made them understand where they fit into the world. Right? They grew up in a world where they understood their culture, they understood where they belonged in their community. They're looking around now, and it's changing in a way that they don't think is for the better. And especially as that cohort starts to get to the age where they have kids, and their kids have to grow up, and they think, I want my kids to have that sense of culture and community. I'm not sure it's there. And look, and I think a big part of that is immigration. And so that's why you see that as a touchstone feature of a lot of people on the new right. But there's a lot to be unpacked in that culture and community, including like what is culture, what is nationality. That's big discussions that we've touched on previously and haven't really dived into. They're hard discussions to have because these terms are contested in their definition. And also, what is it that has decayed community? Are the things that have decayed community things that we can actually fix? We've discussed this a bit previously when we had Chris Berg on the channel. Is it to some degree the natural technological evolution that is partly to blame for a decaying community? And if that's the case, well, how do you unwind that? Do you uninvent technology? It's a tricky set of questions, but to my mind, the core thing is the frustration at the loss of culture and community, the recognition that they matter. Maybe they matter more than we thought they did when we were younger, and the question of what can we do to try and fight for the culture and community that we've decided now in our old age that we do care about. That's what I think the motivating feature is. And then which version of the new right can speak to that? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Let's come back in 3 years' time, Gene, and we can we'll find out.
Yeah, well, I think they'll still be having this discussion because I expect, just given the division, the disunity on the right side of politics, and I think because, Labor will get Green preferences, and then the Teals, they might side with Labor if it's a choice between Labor and some coalition with a significant role for Pauline Hanson. So I think Labor, essentially Labor and the Greens and Teals, that if it's not Labor on its own or Labor and the Greens, they'll be in power. They'll win in the next election. So that then this sort of discombobulation will continue.
The next election, perhaps. I don't know. There's a week is a long time in politics. So 2 years is a long time. But remember, the left-wing media in America were promoting Trump back in 2015 under the understanding that Trump was so unelectable and crazy and like their Pauline Hanson, that if you put him up as their lead candidate, it would guarantee Hillary would win. Right? So if you put up someone from the insurgent right, from the new right, they can never win, and therefore the left will definitely win. That narrative, look, I think it's probably true here. I think it looks like Labor will probably win the next election as things currently stand. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that has been thought before. And then things can change rather suddenly when the wind changes. And the other thing to note here, and this is similar to I think this might be part of the sentiment coming from Taylor P here. There are some people, some Trump supporters in America back in 2015 and maybe some Pauline supporters in Australia, or some just insurgent right people who are just so sick of the establishment right that they no longer care about this argument where people say, well, if you don't support us, Labor might win. And some people are turning around and going, well, screw it. if you're not listening to us when we talk about things that are, essential to us, core about what we find important in the world, if you're not listening to us, we're not going to come and bail you out, let you lose. Right? There's this sort of growth in America of a group of this new right who are saying, look, if the establishment right isn't going to listen to us, let it burn down. Because what's the point of being on the side of the establishment right if they don't care at all what I have to say? So I don't know. Taylor can say if that's is or isn't what motivates his involvement in politics, but that could mean that this liberal argument of, look, Labor's going to be in power, so you have to vote for us. Firstly, it might not be true. Look, Trump, the Italian Prime Minister, I've forgotten her name right now, and potentially Farage. So these things suddenly change quickly. And secondly, I'm not sure we're going to convince the Zoomers that they to actually care about that anymore. I think they might be over it.
Yeah, indeed. Should we talk tax, Labor. John, or you want to pick up some of these comments?
I was just flicking through them as they were coming. I know we'd said we'd do it at the end, but then we, I don't know, it seemed germane as they were coming in. The Liberal and Labor, the Uni Party. Yeah, like I got to say, I've said this before, but I think it's worth noting with Liberal and Labor being the Uni Party, it's not that they sit down and agree with each other. It's that both of them are willing to be led around by the nose by the bureaucracy. Well, like what I call the cultural elite, the people who are at the head of the bureaucracy, the media, and academia. And that's like the cultural milieu of the people who hang around the fancy bars in Sydney and Canberra and Melbourne, and they know they're better than us. I mean, they need to help us, right? Us poor peasants, they need to guide us because us low-educated people might vote the wrong way, but they can help fix that with their, wise, benevolent leadership. This sort of cultural elite, and they really do have quite a lot of power in terms of they actually set the agenda. They write the policies, then they put the policies in front of the politicians, and then they surround the politicians, and then they report on how the politicians respond to that policy. Mm-hmm. So the issue with Liberal and Labor isn't that they sit down and agree with each other. It's that both of them have come to the conclusion that the path of least resistance is to kind of follow that cultural elite, follow the bureaucracy. And they don't really push back and give an alternative to that. And that's why they end up often looking so similar to each other with the trappings of the big fights they have to put on TV. But I would say it's not that it's not that Liberal is the same as Labor or Labor is the same as Liberal. It's that both of them are the same as the bureaucracy, and it's the bureaucracy that runs our country. But I don't know if that sounds too conspiratorial. Quickly going through some of these.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just wondering. I mean, maybe. I mean, I would have thought that they were simply going after the median voter, aren't they? Just trying to get 50 plus one, and I mean, it may be the case that that's their assessment of where the median voter is, that it's someone who's relative, a middle class, maybe maybe one of the mum or dad's a public servant or a teacher, and they're not rich, but they're not, they're doing okay. They're in the middle class, and they may have, some socially liberal or environmentally, pro-environment sort of policies or positions.
There's an element of that they have to live. They have to listen to a big popular zeitgeist. But at the same time, do we really think the median voter, let's be honest, the median voter is a relatively low information voter. Do we really think the average low information voter is actually calling out to change the CGT discount from 50% to 40%? Or that they're insisting that we need biannual indexation of our alcohol and petrol excise? I mean, nobody knows what these words mean, right? No one says this stuff except for bureaucrats. And the bureaucrats put it in front of a politician's nose, and the politician has to do something, and they tend to not know how to do it themselves. So that's no shade on them. They're very busy trying to get votes, kissing hands and shaking babies. And a set of bureaucrats, a set of 20 very impressive-looking bureaucrats with expensive suits and a briefcase full of files this thick with very fancy papers and documents and reports says, this is what all the smart people are saying you should do, Minister. The ministers are going to be a pushover. They're going to be a pushover every time. They go, oh, yes, absolutely, 40% CGT discount. Yes.
John, you may actually be right there. I mean, you may have convinced me because you're right. I mean, there is sort of a policy club, isn't there? There are the policy opinions that are widely accepted amongst the bureaucratic class, and the sort of things Danielle Wood would say about tax policy or productivity policy, that sort of thing. And then that is sort of influential in ministerial offices. So you may have actually convinced me on that. I'm going to have to think more about that.
I'm not denying there's an element of having to listen to a big popular zeitgeist, but that's what the intellectual elite calls populism. And they say that is a scourge on politics, because if it wasn't for populism, then the politicians would listen to the bureaucratic elite when they change the CGT discount to 40%. And they say it's just this appeal to populism that stops me. We would have had our carbon trading system. Yes, that's what all of the cultural elites wanted, and therefore that's what they convinced the Labor of, and they convinced the Greens of, and they've convinced most of the Liberal Party except for Tony Abbott of. And then when Tony Abbott pushed back, he was appealing to this populist notion. And so what did the cultural elite say? These damn populists, they're stopping us from doing good policy. So I agree, there is an element of politicians having to listen if the general public gets loud enough.
Yes.
But that is somewhat at odds with the people who normally run our policy settings. Yeah. And they don't like it. They don't like it when they don't get their way. Those silly people didn't vote for The Voice. Those peasants out there didn't listen to the cultural elite. You notice that 60% of people who live in Canberra did vote for The Voice.
Well, in my electorate too, in Brisbane too. So that happened here too.
I wonder if there's many cultural elite, people who work in education and entertainment and media and bureaucracy in inner city Brisbane and inner city Sydney and inner city Melbourne.
Well, almost certainly, yeah. And
marketing is the same group of sort of cultural elites. They're in that crowd as well. So you get lots of marketing people with little bits of white under their nose, sort of parroting the same talking points as the rest of this cultural elite. Anyway, we got a little bit distracted here. Time's getting on, and we haven't done the roundup. So let's shut.
We haven't talked tax either. I think should we talk tax?
Oh, okay.
That's what we promised in the.
Yes.
That's on the tin.
Let's do that. Let's put the Gene's roundup at the end if we're still going strong. Yeah. So you're right. That's on the tin. What do you want to do first? Capital gains or sin tax?
Well, I think sin taxes, since you pointed out that these were going up, and that news may have escaped some people that they didn't realize that this had occurred. Could you tell us what's going on there, John?
Absolutely. Of course, it wouldn't have escaped people who are signed up to the ATA's newsletter. Get over to Substack, oztaxpayers.substack.com. Make sure you're on that. You only get it's one email a week. We do not inundate you with spam, and it's relatively short, just the issue of the week for you to know about. And that was, if you saw it this morning, the fact that your taxes have gone up again. All right. So just hot on the heels from the fact that the inflation numbers showed that rents have gone up and food has gone up just naturally, well, not naturally, due to too much money sloshing around the economy. And then after that, interest rates have gone up. Then it's like it always comes in threes, I think is the saying. And now we have the automatic indexation of a couple of sin taxes, alcohol tax, alcohol excise, they call it, and petrol tax. And both of these taxes have gone up. Now, they did not go up because there was a debate in Parliament and a vote, and the government said, all right, we're going to put your taxes up. This is an automatic tax increase that happens twice a year. All right, so and one of those times is this week. Congratulations, you're living through this tax increase right now. Now, each tax increase on its own is relatively small, but these tax increases happen twice a year, right? Again and again and again, and it eventually adds up. So their tax increase on petrol, for instance, was 1 cent a litre. Now, in a certain light, you'd say, well, 1 cent a litre, that isn't very much. But if you're putting the tax up 1 cent a litre twice a year, year after year after year after year, I mean, the tax already makes up about, before this increase, it made up 52 cents. So every time you're filling up your petrol, if you think you're paying $1.80, you're paying $1.30 plus 50 cents of just pure excise tax, plus about another 10 or 15 cents of that is GST, right? So you're paying tax on a tax as well here. So this tax is already high enough, 52 cent excise, say 15 cent GST, it depends, GST changes as the price changes. That is a lot of tax. And then that 52 cents just went up to 53 cents. So you might say, oh, it's only 1 cent. Yeah, but it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back. It just keeps building and building and building on the back of higher interest rates, on the back of higher food prices. This is not the right time. I don't think it's ever the right time to push your petrol tax up from 52 cents to 53 cents. It is high enough. It is too high.
This is just an inflation adjustment, isn't it? So it hasn't gone up in real terms, you could argue. You're advocating for declining sin taxes over time, which is fine. I don't mind that. But you have to admit that that's what you're advocating for? Like you're saying this is a tax increase, but it's just an adjustment for inflation, isn't it?
Well, you could make the case if you want an ad valorem tariff, but then what it should be on is on the price of the actual petrol. So this is adjusted not for the petrol inflation, it's adjusted for general inflation. So look, there could be a case that we should have an ad valorem tax, a percentage tax on the petrol, or perhaps just no tax on petrol and just use the GST. But what we have now is a 52 cents sort of block amount. And then they put that up by this time they did it 2% for this last 6 months. And that wasn't based on the fact that petrol prices changed by 2%. So that's anyway, that you could look. I think if you wanted to make that case, the more honest way to make it is just switch to an ad valorem tax.
Yeah.
Right. Just have a percentage tax, right? I mean, like the GST is, it's 10%, right? So that's why I couldn't tell you exactly how much GST do you pay on your petrol. I couldn't tell you exactly. It changes depending on the price.
Yeah.
But I can tell you with the petrol excise, it's 50 was 51.6 cents. Now it's 52.65 cents. Because that's a fixed number, which I don't think is a very sensible way to be doing it at all. We have a ad valorem tax on, switching to alcohol now because that's the petrol part.
Yes.
Alcohol tax went up as well. But no, wine tax didn't go up because wine has an ad valorem tax. So
yeah, that's a special favour to the wine growers, isn't it? I mean, that's something that's of benefit to all of the wine growers who produce all of the cheap grog down in the Riverina, isn't it? All of the the stuff that fills all of the goon bags, so to speak, if you know what I mean. So that actually helps those. Like that's actually it's partly an industry assistance measure, but you're right. I mean, alcohol taxation is a total mess. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's like 4 different versions of it, but it also depends how high you put that ad valorem tax. But so the petrol tax gone up 1 cent. So if anyone, when you go fill up your tank this week, if it's 1 cent higher, you'll know the reason why. The other tax that's changed is the alcohol tax. Now, on average, with the alcohol tax, so not with wine, that's done ad valorem. So that's different and difficult to do a direct comparison with. But a bottle of spirits, right? A bottle of, I should have had one here as a prop. A bottle of spirits, the tax on that starts, not as a percentage, just starts as about $30. So you're never going to buy a bottle of spirits less than $30 because you're paying $30 tax on it. Now, if it's a weak spirit, if it's only 20% alcohol, the tax is going to be lower than that because the tax is per alcohol content. But for a 40% alcohol content bottle, so like most whiskey and rum and whatever else you have, $30 tax straight off the bat, plus GST. So for most, it's also plus another $5 GST. So you're not going to see a bottle of spirits for much less than, well, I guess some people would be able to do some moonshine for about $40 perhaps, but there's very little profit margin in that. And obviously, most bottles of spirits are going to be well above 50 these days.
Yeah. So, John, look, I take your point. I mean, we do tax alcohol a lot. The argument would be that, I mean, if we had much cheaper spirits, then there'd be much greater consumption, and hard liquor is something that people will abuse. Okay. I mean, like I love Scotch whiskey as much as, any gentleman, but I just know that it's something I've got to have in moderation because it is something that it is very strong, and it may be something that there may be a public interest in moderating the consumption of, and hence sending that price signal that says if you're going to drink alcohol, maybe lay off the heavy spirits and maybe have some beer or something, or wine, something a bit lighter.
So just checking, you saying that you, as a responsible, independent adult, know that about yourself, and so you are able to make that decision. But in your opinion, it is very likely that the entire country of Japan, which has bottles of hard liquor for $10 a bottle, the entire country of Japan is probably just stumbling around permanently drunk, just punching each other in the face consistently.
Look, John. Now we're getting into cultural differences, I think, because we're all descendants of heavy drinkers, aren't we? The Europeans, and particularly me. I've got Irish ancestry, so
and we built the world. So why would we want to change that? I mean, the modern world came from the Irish, the English, the Scandinavians, the Germans. I guess the French are in there a little bit, but I don't want to admit it. So if we were drinkers, c'est la vie.
Look,
by the way, they have lower alcohol tax in most of continental Europe. But so if we come from European stock, then why? Anyway, I just don't believe that the world's about to collapse if we're able to have slightly cheaper alcohol. We had cheaper alcohol 20 years ago. Where our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, the people who fought the First World War, the Second World War, they managed to survive in this world, with this crazy, dangerous world without $30 a bottle alcohol tax. They managed to survive. I think we could too. This idea that the world would be scary if the government didn't tax us harder. I struggle to take it seriously to the point where, with not trying to be mean, but I have to fall back on mockery with it. The idea that if we weren't taxed this hard, society would crumble. I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah, well, I'm all for lower taxes. So the question is, do we make up how do we make that tax up, or do we cut? We've got to cut spending, haven't we? And so we need. That's the issue, isn't it? We need to be able to get NDIS under control, cut some other spending, so we can afford to cut these taxes.
Well, I agree with that. Just let me finish, by the way, the size of that tax increase, it's about 50 cents, right? So we were already paying $30 a bottle, and now twice a year it automatically increases. So it's going up 50 cents each time. And again, 50 cents doesn't seem like that much, but it's every time. And by the way, if you prefer the beers, which I'm on tonight, the beers, the average tax is a little bit lower than it is for spirits. Say a carton of beer, you're paying about $21 excise plus another $5 GST, so about 26 of that is tax, and the rest of the price is what you're paying for the actual beer. But again, that's also going up by about 50 cents a carton or 45 cents a carton. So that's the tax increases we've had. They came in this week on the back of higher interest rates, on the back of higher inflation with the higher food prices and rent prices. And I got to say, I think those taxes are already way too high. But if I can't convince people that we need to cut the tax on petrol and alcohol, fine, that can be a hard argument to win, to cut those taxes. Can we at least stop increasing them? So I'd say the government has done a victory lap, because what they've done is they have frozen excises. They've frozen one excise.
Beer,
draft beer in a pub. All right. Yeah. So not wine, because that's a different system. Not spirits. Not beer if you buy it in a can in a pub. Not beer if you buy it from a bottle-o. But just draft beer in a pub. They have frozen the excise until next year. So yay. I guess it's better that they froze it than they didn't. But as I said in the email that went out to everyone this morning, my concern with this is, firstly, it only applies to draft beer. It doesn't apply to spirits. It only applies to draft beer, bought in a pub. It doesn't apply if you buy beer in a bottle-o, and it's temporary. It's only for 2 years, so it's going to the excise is going to kick back in. So I liken this to the government, and this is in so many instances, not just here, but the government sort of quietly and subtly takes $100 out of your bank account every week, and then eventually they turn around and very loudly and flamboyantly hand you back $10 and says, "Look how nice we are." Yeah, but you've been taking the 100 out of my pocket every week. But they do that quietly. You notice they don't rush to put a press release when they increase the excise, when this automatic increase happens. It often happens very quietly. This is not a big announcement every biannually. But when the government decided to freeze draft beer excise for 2 years, that they wanted to announce, to make sure that they got all of the credit and love that's supposed to go along with it. So Yay that they froze it, but I really would prefer they just froze the entire system. And the real conversation should be on not different ways to squeeze a bit more money out of us, but as we've argued before, it ties back to you have to get spending under control. But we need to be looking at ways to, I would argue, cut taxes or cut income taxes in particular. Can I just one more thing here before I throw to you, Gene? Tax discussion means different things to different people, very different things to different people. You say tax reform. If you say tax reform to me in this room, Gene and I talk about tax reform all the time, mostly in the concept of our productivity is low. Therefore, we have not been having real wage growth, right? Your wages haven't been going up, but prices have been going up. We're not becoming more prosperous. Life is becoming, more difficult, or at least it's not getting ahead the way it used to. And with house prices going up, it's actually becoming more difficult. And this is all a productivity problem, which is then creating other problems on the budget balance and all other places. And we come back to, you need to fix productivity. To do that, you need investment and innovation. And to do that, one of the three things I say is, cut tax, cut regulation, and lower energy prices. But one of those is cut tax. And specifically, I mean income tax, really. And so when we talk tax reform, we're saying cut tax to incentivize productivity and investment to get the economy going again. That's what tax reform means to us. And if you're listening to this, it's probably what tax reform means to you. Be aware, if you hear Jim Chalmers or the Labor Party say tax reform, what they mean is a way to get more tax revenue. And I guess it's a reform because they're changing something, but that word is dangerous because it means very different things. If I say I'm for tax reform, Jim Chalmers says, I'm for tax reform. Yeah, but wait a second. What do you mean by tax reform, Jim? Because it's not the same thing I mean. So we're going to see, I think, increasingly, and I'll throw to you for this one, we're increasingly going to see talk from the government about tax reform that they want to do. It is not anything like the tax reform that the ATA and Gene and I have been advocating for a long time. So be aware, be aware.
Well, they're trying to dress up this latest round of tax reform, this potential changes to capital gains tax and also maybe negative gearing. They're saying it's in the interests of housing affordability and also reducing inequality. However, I think we all know that it's really just a tax grab, isn't it? Because they need to fix up the budget. They know that they've got these permanent deficits. There's all the chatter about, or the concern about gymflation, about the federal government spending, all of this, the surprise upgrades to the amount of spending we see, the revisions up. There's concerns that that's contributing to inflation. So unless Chalmers can show that they're getting the budget into better shape, he's going to cop a lot of criticism at the time of the next budget because people will be saying, well, you're not taking inflation seriously. You're not putting downward pressure on interest rates. You're going to be the reason we'll have another cash rate increase. So that's what's driving it. It's that rather than, say, housing affordability or what's the other thing, inequality they're talking about now to try and justify it.
And you notice it's certainly not productivity.
No, certainly not. I mean, what's happened with that whole productivity agenda? I think there was something in the AFR the other day about that whole, what seems to have come out of that roundtable. I mean, if that's it, maybe that's going to be it. It's going to be that tax, that CGT change. Maybe that's what they discussed in that tax session.
Well, they haven't got much to go. I mean, realistically, a productivity agenda needs tax cuts, not tax shuffling of the deck chairs on the Titanic, which is what they're looking to do. And the Labor Party, their internal calculus, like you say, is they're getting hammered because they have big budget deficits. Quite rightly, those deficits are hurting our export industry and pushing up prices. So, quite rightly. So how do you fix a budget deficit? Well, you either cut spending or you raise tax. And Labor's not going to cut spending, not seriously. I mean, they should. That's what I very strongly believe that we need to be doing. We need to cut spending so that we can get the deficit down and cut tax. But I don't think they got the guts for it. So the only option they have left is to increase tax. So they can't really cut tax then. So that's off the table. And then of the three, I say it's cut tax, cut regulation, and lower energy prices. Well, they say they're trying lower energy prices by getting everyone to build a solar panel. But in my opinion, their energy agenda has been trending us towards higher energy prices. And I think the evidence is showing that to be the case. And they can't reverse position on that now. They're too much invested, right? They're pot committed in poker parlance. They're pot committed to the position of saying that we have to go all in on switching from fossil fuels to unreliables. They call it renewables, but the correct word is unreliables. So they're not going to change there. And so the only option they have left is to, cut regulation? The Labour Party? I mean, they will say cut regulation, but what are they going to cut? Labour regulation? Really? They're going to cut the rules that benefit unions? Are they going to cut OH&S? They're going to cut business regulation? Yeah, they haven't really got anywhere to go on productivity. They know they need to do it, but each lever they could pull, they're scared to pull. So that's why that, I think, has been sidestepped. And now we've got tax reform, which just means tax increases. So what is the detail that they're putting forward on this? Feel free to segue this however you like, Gene. This company tax proposal.
Sorry, you mean capital gains tax?
Yeah, sorry, what did I say?
You said company tax. I mean, that's something that they have been considering, that whole sort of, there is all that talk about what the PC proposed, but I just think that's probably unworkable. I can't see how they can implement that. And it gets so much pushback because that is just a blatant tax grab, that additional cash flow tax for the largest companies. I'm not sure whether they can do that. But what they're talking about, what it sounds like is going to happen is they're going to cut the capital gains tax discount from 50% to 25%. So they'll halve it. So what that means is instead of before the tax is calculated on a capital gain, you take 50% off it, you can now only take 25% off it. And so instead of being taxed on 50% of the capital gain, you end up being taxed on 75% of the capital gain, which effectively means a 50% increase in the amount of capital gains tax you pay, if I'm doing the math right. I think so. I hope so. That's pretty simple math.
Now, the number you mentioned there, that was the same policy that Bill Shorten took to the election against Scott Morrison back in 2019, and then Bill Shorten lost that. Look, I suspect, I have no inside information. No one in Labor gives me the goss, right? So, but this is just my guess. I suspect they're going to say something like switching CGT to 40%. Right. So they're going to say that the last shift was too big. This is a small shift. They're going to make the case, which is half persuasive, that 40% will still compensate people for the inflation effects on their capital assets. And it'll just sort of wind back that a little bit. So that's where I think they'll go. But can I put this in a bit broader context for the listening viewer? And I'll do it with answering a question from Aussie. G'day, Aussie. Ask the question, which tax cuts give us better economic benefit, personal rates or company tax rates? Now, firstly, I'll answer the question and then I'll just segue onto what I want to say. The company tax rate is mostly just a prepayment of personal rates in Australia because we have dividend imputation. So income tax rates are more important to cut than company tax rate. But it's kind of, with no disrespect, Aussie, it's kind of the wrong question to ask, right? So the question to ask is, and this probably is the question you might have thought you were asking, but the tax on income earned by working or the tax on income earned on capital. So labor income or capital income. So which tax cut, the tax cut on labor income or the tax cut on capital income, which of those gives more economic benefit? And the answer is the answer is pretty unambiguous, but it's not the answer most people want to hear. And that is, taxes on capital income have a far worse economic impact, right? Capital is far more mobile, right? And most people are going to have a job. They're going to need some sort of income from working to get by, but you don't necessarily have to make that next investment. Yeah. Right? Instead of making that next investment, you could just buy a yacht, right? So the capital is much more movable, much more elastic, right? So when you change the way you treat capital income, you get a much bigger response. Then with the way you change labor income, you get a much smaller response. Also, you may have heard us saying this before. I repeat this so often, you must be bored of it, but I'm going to keep saying it. Our economy is in the toilet because productivity is low. That's why your wages aren't going up. That's why prices are going up. That's why you're not feeling any richer. That's why things are getting more difficult. That's why we can't balance the budget, right? This productivity is a big problem just sitting below the surface of most things about our economy, right? The only way of fixing productivity is more investment in innovation. Investment in innovation. That comes from capital, right? You have to invest in capital. And it's the capital income that comes after you invest, right? So that's the side of the economy that actually drives productivity. So it's more responsive, and it's the thing that drives long-term wage growth, right? So this is why it kind of does matter how you're taxing capital income. And this is where we get into capital gains tax. So just to nerd out on you just a little bit more, right? There are multiple ways you can get capital income, right? So how do you get capital income? Well, you save some money, you invest it. So you could just put it in the bank. That counts as investing it. You could buy some shares. That counts as investing it. You could buy a property. You could buy some gold. You could buy some Bitcoin, right? So you save, you invest it. That invested money then goes into building up capital stock. That capital stock earns you an income. And you could receive that income either because the capital asset appreciated. What? I don't need to learn how to turn that off at some stage. The capital asset appreciated, like you bought gold, the price of gold went up and you sold gold. That's capital appreciating. Or it could be you bought shares and you got paid a dividend. Or it could be you left your money in the bank and you got paid interest. These are all types of return on capital, right? Capital income. So you get capital income through interest, through dividends, through capital gains. And then all of those three, just to show you how stupid our tax system is in Australia, all three of those are taxed differently in Australia, right? So you get slightly different treatment depending on whether you're getting interest, dividends, or capital gains, but they are all a form of capital income. And capital gains, you buy shares at $1, you sell shares at $2, you made $1 profit. That's a capital gain, right? You got a $1 return on your investment. Currently, you get a 50% discount on that. So say you made $1, if your tax rate is 50%, you normally pay 50 cents. Well, now you only pay 25 cents, right? So you get a discount. And the common complaint is, well, why are they getting a discount? That's not fair. Fair enough at first blush. The immediate response to that is, yes, but when you hold an asset, you also have to deal with inflation. So imagine you bought an asset and I know doing these numbers on the fly gets a bit annoying, but stick with me. You bought an asset for $100. If there's 5% inflation every year, after 1 year, if it was worth $105, you haven't actually made anything, right? That's just staying still, right? If there's 5% inflation and you sell it after a year for $105, all you can do is buy the exact same stuff you could have bought last year. You haven't gotten any richer in terms of what you could buy, right? So yes, your asset went up 5%, but all of the prices in the country went up 5%. So you're no better off. And so the argument is that you need some sort of discount to compensate people for the inflation for when you're holding assets. So that's the argument for the capital gains tax discount. And then Labor would come back and say, yes, but the discount is too high. That's why we need to decrease the discount. So that's setting the stage for that debate. And I'd say the Liberals are going to say stick with the 50% discount. Labor is going to say, let's move to a 40 or a 30 or a 25% discount. Can I just put two other options on the table, and then I'll shut up, Gene, and you can rip on all of this. The old system, and not just the old system, but also the system that Jared Rennick supports, is going back to the idea of capital-based indexation. So you notice the problem with capital gains tax is you could be taxing just inflation, which is quite unfair. There is a system for that, and that is you say you could buy that asset at $100. Inflation means it would go to 105. So then what you do is you just say, all right, so that 5%, we don't tax that 5%. Right? That was the old system we had, the asset price indexation. So if you have 5% inflation, then we don't count that, we don't tax that 5% return on your increase in your capital asset. So if you made 7%, well, you don't have to pay anything on the 5%, but you pay capital gains tax on the 2%, right? On the real, we call it real. Adjusted for inflation in economic parlance is real. The real return, you pay your capital gains tax on the real return. That's the system we used to have. That's the system that Jared Rennick suggests going back to. And I'll tell you what, I'm a little bit sympathetic to that. I think you'd actually find more technically efficient outcomes if you wanted to nerd out on the way that tax would work. by doing it that way. But I have a fourth suggestion. You got the Liberals, 50% discount. Labor, 30 or 40% discount. They cut the discount. Jared Rennick, go back to the old system of indexing it so you don't pay tax on that inflation. I would say index the capital price to inflation plus 3%. And why that?
Yeah.
Because I want to adjust it for not only the inflation, but also the time value of money. Now, I've kind of just asserted that it's 3%. Maybe it's 2%. I'm happy to have a committee work out the correct time value of money, right? But indexing it, the capital price for inflation and the time value of money, compensating you for the fact that you had to go a year without access to your money. And we do that all the time. There's a word for it in the English language. It's called interest rates, right? Sort of risk-free underlying real interest rate is the time value of money. Because you have to compensate people if you're asking them to go without some of their assets or go without their spending for a year. So I would argue that that is the most efficient capital tax system. So there's 4 options on the table, I would say, but I've probably nerded out enough for that. Or maybe I'll write this up and you'll be able to go and see it on Substack soon. But the 4 options for capital gains tax.
Yeah, and another argument for concessional treatment of capital gains is a comment, I think it's a good one from Aussie. If you want to show that one, John, where one? The one that's just come in. So even if we go back to indexation, our top tax rate's 47%, which is still very high. Half the real gain is taken and kicks in at 190K. So, I mean, you might want to have some concessional treatment because if given, if the capital gains realised and then that gets added to your income in a particular year, and then a lot of it's going to be taxed at that top tax rate. So
yeah, so the difference is the difference between my system and Jared Rennick's system to some degree, and the status quo will be on how high your returns are. So my approach would be would have lower tax on people who have normal returns, and we end up with higher taxes on people who have super returns, like above normal returns, economic profits in the parlance, the exact thing you're supposed to be taxing in economic theory. So yes, it would increase the tax on people who made windfall gains. If you bought something and it doubled in price in a year, then 50% is going to be a much bigger discount because in a year, you're only getting under my system inflation plus 3% discount, effectively. But if you had just normal returns, if you were getting, say, 6% returns, you don't pay any tax under my system. So that's less than 50% discount. You're paying 0. So yeah, my system would be more concessionary for people who make normal capital returns and less concessionary for people who make super profits. And I admit that, but I think if you just did the economics of it, I think you'll find that it is more Pareto optimal. What I'm suggesting, it is just more taxing like things in a like way. It makes it more equivalent with the way we tax dividends and interest. And look, these are just 3 ways of getting capital returns, right? We should be ideally taxing all ways of getting capital returns the same way, and my way would achieve that. So yeah, look, as a separate point, I would say the top tax rate shouldn't be 47%.
Yeah.
But look, my system would still be concessionary because it would be each year you're getting a concession of inflation plus 3%. And if you're just making normal returns, that's going to end up being a bigger concession. But yes, for people who make 100% returns a year, my system would be less concessionary. That's true. But you're not going to have everything. Look, the way I would create a concession for capital investment, to incentivize investment, because investment is what you need to grow the economy, I would do that at the beginning of the process. Right? You save, then you invest, you build capital, you get capital return. We're talking about how you tax the capital return. I would make it much more advantageous to save. So, and we're going off on a bigger segue here, and I love this topic. I think it is the big missing part of the Australian tax. I think you should be able to put money into a savings trust. The government should give everyone some sort of an official savings trust. And if you put money into that each year, up to say a nominal amount, say 20,000 a year. So I'd like it to be open-ended, but to make it politically realistic, let's say up to 20,000 a year, that money is fully tax deductible. You don't have to pay tax on the money you earned that you saved. So that's a big tax deduction on the income you earned today if you save it. If you put money into that trust, it goes in fully tax-free. It earns money fully tax-free. And when you take it out, then you pay tax. So that would be where I think you would want to be incentivizing more capital investment. That would be the concession in my world. And then I would adjust the CGT to base plus inflation plus 3%. But anyway, it's a good point by Aussie. The top marginal tax rate is just too high, right? So that's another thing I would do is look. It's not realistic in our political system to cut the top tax rate. The top tax rate basically only exists so that politicians can convince us that they hate rich people, because then you'll vote for them if you prove that you hate rich people, which is a really deeply sort of fucked up set of political incentives. Excuse the language. It does nothing to raise revenue. It hurts the economy. All it does is prove how much our politicians hate rich people, and that makes people vote for them. So that's very sad. But if that's reality, I think this is just, and then come back on all of this. So sorry for talking too much.
Yeah.
This is politically possible. Increase the threshold. You say it kicks in at 190. That's the crime. That should kick in at 500,000 or even $1 million. 47% should be the millionaire's tax, right? It shouldn't apply to people earning $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 a year. So I would say that is an achievable reform, right? Push that bracket way out to at least 500,000. That would have a big efficiency gain, right? That would actually really help the economy. You could keep that 47% so you can still prove to the voters how much you hate rich people. I think that is a win-win political idea. If anyone from the LNP or One Nation's listening, there you go. That's what you should start to do. Sorry, Gene, you were going to say.
Well, John, first, I think that's a really good idea you had about how to for capital gains tax. So I'll have to think about that a bit more, and it'd be good to, you can put that in a nice policy paper. It'd be good to crunch the numbers on it too. But that makes sense because economic theory tells us that we want to exempt, we don't want to tax the normal return to saving, like the normal sort of normal return. So I think that's good. I like that. Just the point about the top marginal tax rate. I know you're embellishing, but it does raise a lot of revenue, doesn't it? I mean, isn't it raising a disproportionate amount of the revenue, or at least the top? I mean, isn't there some statistic the top 10% of households pay, I don't know, 50% of tax or whatever it is? And so a lot of that hard work's got to be done by that top marginal tax rate, isn't it?
Yes, well, those can both be true. I mean, the way you work out whether it's raising money is you've got to look at, just say we raise it from 47 to 48. So there's two things going on. One is you get one more percentage point.
Yes.
Right. So if we earned $1 billion, you get one more percent of that, you get $10 million. All right. So that's the first thing you look at. That is the only thing our Treasury looks at, which is a crime, because there's two things that happen. One is you get that extra 1%. The other thing that happens is because taxes are higher, some investments don't take place.
Yes.
We know this. This is a fact. I mean, there is a statistic that measures the size of this, the elasticity of taxable income. It's been measured all around the world. There's been lots of estimates, and it is vanishingly rare. You get some sort of commies who come up with an estimate saying, 0%. Is a 0% response. No one responds to prices. Right? You get a few people who say it, but you get 99% of the literature says people do respond to prices.
Yes.
So you've got the elasticity of taxable income. It measures when you put up tax by 1%, how much does that decrease your tax base? So there's two things happening, right? You're getting 1% more, so that gets you more money, but you can tax fewer things because less stuff is happening, and that gets you less money. And it's not that hard to plug in. You plug in your mainstream estimates, and once the tax rate gets to about 40%, above that, it could be 40, 45, somewhere around there. Once you get above that, you're not raising money. And once you get above 50, 55%, you are certainly losing money. That's why when we cut the top tax rates around the Western world, they used to be, I think, 70% in Australia, 90% in America, 95% in the UK. That's why the Beatles wrote their song Taxman, where it says 1 for me, 19 for you. 1 for me, 19 for you. That's a 95% tax rate, right? So all of those tax rates, they came down quite sharply. And when those tax rates came down and they stopped at around 40 to 50%, when they did that, there wasn't a drop in revenue in any of those countries. All of those countries saw an increase in revenue. Right? So when you take taxes from like 0 to 10 to 20 to 30, when you do those tax increases, unfortunately, that does raise more money, right? I don't want to do it, right? I wish there was no tax. But the truth is, if you took a tax from 10 to 20 to 30%, you would definitely raise more money for the government. I get that. That's true. Once you get to about 40%, going from 40 to 50 to 60, you're not raising any more money. And then once you get past 60, you are losing money. The government is raising less money by raising tax beyond that point. So 47%, You could cut that to 40 and it would be a rounding error in the budget. Right? Those two effects would roughly offset. By the way, we saw this in the UK when they introduced, they had a 40% top tax rate. They introduced a 50% top tax rate. And after a couple of years, they studied it. They expected to raise, I think it was £3 billion. They raised negative £1 billion.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but they had to make when they made a few adjustments, they said, oh no, we might not have lost money. We might have made, tuppence and halfpenny. And so like there's caveat, but they basically made near nothing, right?
Yeah.
And in the context of the broader budget, these are rounding errors. You are not raising money through these taxes. These taxes exist primarily to show the voters how much you hate rich people. But who studies elasticities of taxable income for a living? Myself notwithstanding.
There's all that work in the States. I mean, there are various different estimates, but I've seen some estimates that would suggest you can push that top marginal rate up a lot higher than that. But look, maybe we have another session on this. I'll have another
let's
look
do that
at
because
paper. Yeah.
Because I think you might be talking about a paper that came out of Harvard where they pointed that out. What they did there, one of the assumptions they did is they assumed it was a flat tax, which is just not true. It's going to be a progressive tax, and that does change the way the tax system works, right? So, I mean, that automatically takes 20 or 30% off the top rate you can get away with, right? So that's just a very cheeky / dishonest assumption. And secondly, they just said whatever raises the that actually gets off on a bit of a segue, so maybe I won't go into that now. But I'd be happy to do a whole session on that.
Yeah, I think it'd be good.
I saw that paper coming out of Harvard, and it's bullshit.
Because my impression was a lot of the tax ends up being paid by the higher income earners,
but that's true. But that's because they earn a lot of the money, and they're still paying 47% on that shit ton of money. So that's still most of the tax. And people earning below about $50,000 to $60,000 aren't paying any net tax. So if we're paying zero net tax, then obviously the people who are paying 40% on all of their money are going to end up carrying most of the burden.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that if you increase the tax by 1%, you're going to make a windfall gain. Indeed.
Yeah.
Like when Abbott introduced his 2% top-up tax, right? So Abbott he increased the top marginal tax rate. I went through the numbers there. The growth in revenue coming from the top taxpayers went down, right? He introduced an extra tax, so you'd expect it would go up, right? But the rate of growth, the top taxpayers were paying before that, for like the 5 years before that, their tax revenue coming from the richest people was going up 10% each year. And then he introduced an extra 2% tax, and the amount they started paying started going up by about 1 or 2 a year instead of 10. So that doesn't make any sense if you assume that the system works like the media tells us. What obviously happens is there was a behavioral response, which we just know. It's it's not a mystery that if you increase the tax on making profitable investments, people make fewer profitable investments.
Yeah, I agree.
And they're not making profitable investments for fun. They're doing it for a return. You decrease the return, they do fewer of them. It's
I agree.
Anyway, that's a big dive. Did you have anything else to say about the other? Because I ranted on a lot of different segues there. I don't know if you took notes, but did you have any other?
I like your proposal for capital gains tax. That's worth considering. And again, it's just it's a tax grab. It's not genuine tax reform. I mean, they'll try and cover it up, or they'll try and cover it in the fig leaf. Would you say of it's about dealing with inequality or housing affordability, and maybe it'll have some marginal impact. But look, really, it's just a big tax grab, and it could be a significant one. What people are talking about 25%, like cutting it to 25%, but I think what you're talking about politically is going to be an easier sell for them, and that may be what they end up doing.
All right, we've made it to an hour 20. Do you want to dive through Gene's roundup, or?
All I wanted to do, John, was I just wanted to point out we were right. They said RBA had to increase the cash rate. It's embarrassing for them. The first central bank after the easing phase of the monetary policy cycle to increase the cash rate. It looks like they didn't lift it far enough. So that chart there, Australia's in red. That's our official cash rate. Look how we were much lower than the US, the UK, and New Zealand that I have in that chart. But what's extraordinary, the other thing I noticed, and we're actually at the end of it, you see our cash rates going up. So that's our overnight interest rate. in the overnight money market. Now New Zealand's just above. They're around 2 and a bit. Or is it 2 and a quarter? I should have checked. But they've managed to get their cash rate down because they, for a while, they looked like they were doing better than us in inflation, but their inflation's picking up again, and it may be that New Zealand has to lift later this year. So I've had a look at what's been happening, in Australia and New Zealand. So New Zealand's got their inflation ticking above 3%. They looked like they'd crushed it. They really ramped up their cash rate to get on top of it. One of the consequences is that now New Zealand's got unemployment above 5%, and that could be a reason why they don't end up increasing their cash rate, but we'll see. So at the moment, Australia, we have the is it ignominy, or it's not a good look that we've had to increase it. It looks like our central bank really just stuffed up. They didn't take into account just how much money the government was pumping into the economy or spending and creating inflationary pressures. So it's all a bit embarrassing, and we knew that was coming. The other thing I've been looking at is just what's been happening in gold and silver. When Kevin Warsh was announced as the new Federal Reserve Chair at the end of last week, the gold and silver suddenly plunged. Now, there's been some recovery in gold, but it hasn't gone back above 5,000 as far as I know. I mean, who knows? I may have missed the last bit of data, but it was near $5,500 an ounce. It fell, well below that when that announcement of Kevin Warsh as federal chair came out, and now it's sort of heading back toward 5,000. But yeah, for a while, markets thought, Kevin Warsh would be great. He's an inflation hawk. We're going to have someone sensible in the Federal Reserve who's going to be able to manage Trump. And so there was less concern about that whole great debasement thesis that we were talking about. And the other thing I've been looking at is just the crazy ongoing growth of house prices in Brisbane, over 15%. Perth's higher than that. So is Darwin. But I mean, Brisbane at 15% is rather extraordinary. Some of it's the Olympics, I guess. Some of it's just people think, maybe they're in Sydney, and where can I invest my money? I don't want to invest maybe I don't want to invest it in Melbourne or Victoria because they've got all their problems down there. Brisbane looks a lot better and it's cheaper than Sydney. So let's pump a whole, bunch of money into the Brisbane property market. And it's raising eyebrows. Leith Van Onselen and Macro Business had a great article today about potentially a bubble in the Brisbane market, which will later trigger a correction. I thought he made a lot of really good points. And so, recommend checking that out. John, that's all from me on the data. Any thoughts, any responses, reactions?
Just a quick reaction on those housing prices. It's an interesting indictment on how livable the various governments have made their cities, which is there could be a real element here. I mean, there may well be a bubble. I take that point. I think the whole thing may be a bubble. But in terms of the differentials here, these differentials might just be an indicator for how effectively the various governments have managed those cities so that people would want to live there. Yeah. And to that degree, there's a premium. Like if Brisbane has been run better than Melbourne, then there is a benefit you get from being someone who already owned in Brisbane. You're getting paid a premium because you've been voting for governments that have been less stupid than the Melbourne governments.
Look, I think there's something to that. There's going to be a demand side impact in Melbourne. I mean, Melbourne's had much greater growth of supply on the supply side too. So Melbourne's benefited from that. So, it's a classic identification problem. How do you identify what's demand driven, what's supply driven? But yeah, I think there is, there's potentially some part of that. And I think those investments along the river, Howard Smith Wharves, I think there is a lot of amenity in Brisbane that is helping to support those higher prices. So I think that's part of the story for sure.
Indeed. All right. Well, just cognizant of the fact that we're an hour and a half, and there are quite a few messages or comments came through.
Yeah, that was
Are you
great.
good with us dive into some of these messages?
Yeah,
so
go for it.
Here that I this was just, I think, a reaction to something I said earlier, so I wanted to take it. Government with savings trust. I want to be clear. I didn't mean the government would run the savings trust. I meant that they would allocate that you could have a savings trust with concessional savings, right? So that that would be the tax advantaged savings account, right? You could have other savings account that aren't tax advantaged. I don't know why you do it, but you could. But I'm saying that they should specify that everyone can have one tax advantaged savings account, not that the government runs where that money goes. Because as you say, that's kind of what, to some degree, superannuation is turning into.
Yeah.
So that's being run by unions who run super funds, and those unions linked to the Labor Party. And then that increasingly looks like the government is going to raid those super funds for their stupid and nefarious purposes. But no, I'm just saying a savings account that you fully control where the investments go. So you could use that money. You could use it for anything, because when you take it out, you pay the full tax rate, in my opinion. It's just that when you put it in, you don't pay tax, which actually means what I'm proposing there, it may sound somewhat radical, like this big tax cut. You could put $20,000 in and get a $20,000 tax deduction if you put $20,000 in that savings account. What a big deduction.
Yeah.
That's exactly how consumption taxes work. That's what a GST does. What I'm suggesting is functionally equivalent to a GST, an income tax. If you made all savings fully deductible, and I'm not quite even being that generous, but if you made all savings fully deductible, it would be functionally equivalent to a GST. It would be what they call a Caldor tax, right?
Yeah.
So that's not that crazy of an idea. And nearly every economist agrees that a GST is more efficient than an income tax. So I'm suggesting making the income tax more efficient, right? According to mainstream economics' own sort of rules. But yes, I'm not suggesting the government controls it. I think you are right. If the government controlled it, that would be dangerous.
Just for clarity, John Humphreys is not a communist. I think we have to. I think that's pretty obvious.
A good question here from Lyndon. Are renewable scam subsidies included in the budget? Basically, no. For most of it, no, right? So they put it on the capital side of the budget, and you don't see when the people are reporting the budget, they're reporting the spending side. There's two sides, the spending side and the capital side. And what they often do is these subsidies, this is actually one of the biggest scams in the budget, right? There is a government agency, and if you invest in a government business, that doesn't show up in the budget at all, right? That just shows in a change, switching for assets. You're switching an asset of cash into an asset of owning equity in a business. It does not show up in the budget at all. One of the businesses the government runs, all they do is hand out money and don't get it back. Now, in my opinion, that doesn't count as a business. That's just a subsidy wrapped in the clothing of a business. But if the business model, no one, like if it wasn't the government, who would have a business model and go to investors? I have an idea. I have a business. We'll raise money and we'll give it away. You imagine the investors would say, all right, so wait a second, how do we make money? Oh, no, we don't make money. We just take your money and give it away. That's not a business, right? And yet we literally have that. That's one of the government's government-owned businesses that has that business model. So it doesn't show up in the budget, but they take your money, they give it away, and then every now and then they write that off as, oh dear, our business is worth less. Yes, it's worth less because you have no revenue stream. So I think that's a scam.
Are you talking about Clean Energy Finance Corporation?
Is that the one? I foolishly didn't come in here and know we would talk about this, so I didn't write them all down. There's a whole series of them.
Let's just be clear. By not in the budget, you mean it's not in the normal budget account?
Not in the budget balance, right? So not when they say the underlying cash balance. It's not like the information's in the budget. That's how I know about it, right? Because most people aren't reading that the details in the appendix of budget statement 4, chapter 6, appendix 3, table 18.3614 alpha bravo. Yeah, like they're seeing the underlying cash balance or the fiscal balance, which is splashed on the front page of every newspaper. The deficit is $40 billion, and in very small print down the bottom, plus an extra 20 billion that we're not telling you about.
Investments in non-financial assets for policy purposes. Yeah, which is all.
Well, no, this doesn't even show up. That doesn't even show up in the policy purposes one. Some of them.
Right.
If they say it's just an investment, then it's just an investment that gets written off. And when you make the investment, it doesn't show up. And when it gets written off, it doesn't show up. Very cheeky, right? So, look, most of it isn't that blatant. Mostly they are a little bit more subtle in the way they do it, right? So they give concessionary loans, but they do get some money back. So they can say, look, this is a business. It's a government-run bank, and this bank gives out loans. We only give loans to renewables. We don't give loans to any cheap energy, right? Which by the way, Matt Canavan, anyone from the LNP, if you're listening, this seems like a inside the Overton window way of adjusting these policies. All of these government-run banks, government-run businesses set up to just funnel taxpayer money into energy. Instead of saying we only give concessionary loans to unreliable energy, just say we give concessionary loans to any cheap energy. I changed them all from renewable energy fund to cheap energy fund. And then you can just funnel all of this off-budget money into cheap energy instead. Right, so that would be a subtle little way. Most people wouldn't even notice that because most people don't understand how any of this works. But that would be a small, subtle way that they could start taking away the bias and actually probably helping achieve cheaper energy. But yes, so the most renewable subsidies don't show up in the budget bottom line. But yes, it can still be inflationary. Well, it kind of depends how that, there's multiple different ways they do it. The one I was talking about, the particularly egregious one, is clearly just inflationary because it's clearly just spending and they're just faking it, pretending it's a business. There are other ones where they actually are running it kind of like a business. And if those ones actually do get a return, those aren't inflationary. They're still a bad idea, in my opinion. But just to be fair, those other ones, if they don't make a loss, then they won't be inflationary. They will just bias the energy system towards renewables and away from cheap energy. So they'll just push up energy prices, but they won't necessarily push up all the other prices. That's fair enough, isn't it? I'm being fair there.
Yeah, go for it, John. I'm all for cheap energy, and I think the policies that we've adopted, have been, terrible for that achieving that objective. So, fully on board there.
This comment here, Topher goes on about if people had to pay taxes out of their wages themselves, then there would be serious discussion. Most look forward to the small return they get. This is true. Singapore has much lower income tax than us. And it was argued to me, and I thought it sounded strange when I first heard it, but it kind of resonates, that one of the reasons for that is they have to just go and pay their tax at a lump sum at the end of the year. And because of that, Singaporeans are all acutely aware of how much they're paying. And when they pay it, they really don't enjoy paying it. And because of that, there is a very strong political pressure that you don't want to be a government that says, oh, we're increasing that. So, that's the other version of this, just to keep spinning it, is if you had to pay it all in 5-cent pieces, then it would also be so painful that would also create a disincentive against having taxes too high. But that one's a bit more of a joke.
I think withholding tax is definitely one reason for the growth of government since the end of the Second World War. The fact that we introduced withholding tax during the war, didn't we? Or at least they did in the States, and we must have either, during the war or pretty soon after that. And
we introduced income tax, right? So income tax, full stop, not just the withholding element. It was introduced in the First World War, and then it was wound back, or federal income tax anyway, and then was wound back and then reintroduced in the Second World War as a temporary government measure to get us through the war. And that temporary moment is dragging on for a little bit longer than I had hoped.
Yeah.
Just going back to my earlier comment about Japan must be just full of drunk people fighting each other. Lyndon has seen some drunk Japanese people. And RW saying Europe has lower taxes on alcohol and smokes. Yeah, maybe that's why Europe's imploding. There you go. It's not the massive migrants undermining their countries. It's the alcohol is too cheap. Another comment from RW earlier. Fuel costs go up, in turn affect all the businesses as they have to pass it on to customers. And that's also true for energy costs, by the way. Energy is a core element, a core input of nearly everything. So when energy prices go up, it stings. The ramifications reverberate through the economy.
Yeah.
Look, I also think the tax we have on petrol at the moment, which adds up to about $1,000 a year, an average car, the average driving, an average petrol price, adds up to about $1,000 a year of extra tax that if you're thinking how much tax you pay, you've got to factor that in if you own one car. I can't help but think it's related to an attitude from our cultural elites, our bureaucratic, media, academic elites, who don't approve of car lifestyles. People who live in the outer suburbs, who enjoy their cars, who maybe enjoy hooning, or enjoy their four-wheel drive going off-road. I think there is a tendency amongst the people who set policies in this country to not have much appreciation for that segment of our society. I think there is a bit of an anti-car bias, which I think comes from an anti-suburban sprawl bias. And I'll put my cards on the table. I am pro-suburban sprawl. We can get into that discussion on housing some other day, but I think suburban sprawl is the way to go. You need more houses, but I don't want us to just build up, because if you don't have big enough houses, people don't have babies. So that gets back to a whole other conversation we've had before about the fertility rate. So urban sprawl for the win, and urban sprawl only works with cars. And yet what we have is $1,000 a year tax you pay on petrol, that, plus registration fees for having a car, and you get massive subsidies if you're taking the train around the inner city. So we have
that's mad. Yeah, I'd cut that subsidy. That's crazy. Like the 50-cent fares, and because it's fixed in nominal terms, it's becoming much cheaper in real terms, and then the subsidy increases in real terms every year. It's just madness.
So Queensland's gone to extremes with massive subsidies on the trains, but Sydney has subsidies on their trains and buses as well, as I'm sure do all the major cities. And they have big subsidies on the way to get around in their big cities, and then they tax the bejesus out of you if you're in a car. And if you're living in the outer suburbs, or if you're living in the regions, or if you're living rural, then you're most likely relying on a car. So we've got a system that is very much biased towards sort of the inner city train takers and against outer suburban, rural and regional car drivers. And I think that's a fundamental misalignment in our politics. I think there is a niche there that some smart politicians could get on and say, they are pro-drivers. I am pro-people who drive. So I'm going to rebalance that tax and subsidy mix.
Peter Dutton tried to do that, but it didn't work. Probably because it was only a temporary cut, or maybe he just, it was mixed to higher income taxes. So it was, look at the idea of an excise cut was a good idea, but it was temporary and it was offset by higher income taxes. So it was exactly that was a stuff up.
It was just obviously politics before good policy there. Now you can see these messages when they come in. Let me know if there's something here that you wouldn't. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, they index our taxes, but they don't index our tax brackets. Yeah. That is a very good point. Of course, the non-indexing of our tax brackets is what creates bracket creep, which is why your income taxes go up every year, even if you don't know it. It's another stealth tax, right? Your income taxes are going up every year. They just don't tell you about it because they don't want you to know, because they want to take your money without you complaining. So don't let them get away with it. Make sure you complain. And this is another one. This is the government is often, anything they can index to make sure they get more money, they do. Anything they can forget to index so that they get more money, they do that. Yeah. Right? Land taxes, not threshold. The same in New South Wales now. New South Wales used to have the land tax threshold indexed. They took that away. So now there is a bracket creep on land tax. There's also a bracket creep on payroll tax. Right? For the businesses that have to pay payroll tax, that kicks in at a certain turnover. So if you're a business that's just below that and you do nothing different and inflation happens, it's going to push you into the payroll tax bracket. Right? Again, these things should be indexed, but the government accidentally forgets to index them when accidentally forgetting is good for their revenue. All right. Was there anything on there that you wanted to get to?
No, I thought that was really good tonight, John. I think you've come up with some good ideas there. So I think we've got to get some of them in on paper and get them out there, because I think they could be influential in the debate. I think, very well grounded in public finance and economic theory. So I thought that was really good. I was really, really excited about some of those ideas.
Thank you. It's just, a lot of those I'm reheating from the last federal election campaign. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance put out I think an idea a week for a while, a tax idea a week. And that's some of those that I'm reheating for the audience now.
Right. I should have paid more attention. Somehow I didn't see those messages around here in Spring Hill in Brisbane. So yeah, but next time I'll definitely look out for them because that's good stuff.
One last comment on this one from Clean Jimmy. Withholding tax was a mistake. Now, I suspect Clean Jimmy knows this, but Gene, here's your pop quiz. Who came up with withholding tax?
Well, I don't know if he came up with it, but Milton Friedman was involved in the design of it when he was at the US Treasury in the 40s, I believe, wasn't he? I think he regretted
later said it was his, one of his biggest mistakes. But yeah, because it goes to a point, which I think this is a fascinating bigger point, which we do not have time to get into, but I'll just drop this sort of big point on the table now to think about. As economists, we are taught transaction costs are bad, right? They impede your ability to, high transport costs impede your ability to trade with someone far away from you. And if you can get transaction costs down, things just run more smoothly, right? You take away the dirt in the machine. I think transaction costs can play a positive role. And I think we're only starting to become aware of this now as we see transaction costs get so low that we're starting to see that positive role go away. And we didn't notice it before because like a fish in water, you never really know it's there. And the transaction cost of having to painfully go in and pay the tax afterwards, that's costly, right? And so withholding tax took away that transaction cost. But that transaction cost also served a purpose. It helped to concentrate people's focus on, wait, is this actually a good idea? And so we might have actually got better tax policy if that transaction cost had been there. But what Milton Friedman did kind of made sense with the economics that you and I are taught, get the transaction costs down, economy will be more efficient. And on a certain level, that argument is internally robust. But I think that there may be a case that there are some positive spillovers from transaction costs that we are not fully aware of, and we are only becoming aware of now as transaction costs decrease. And I'll just give one other example of this that gets a little bit fluffy, and that is, and going back before about one of the cores of the new right, it's about culture and community. And as I've become an old man and had kids and moved out to the farm, I've become very invested in this idea that culture and community matters. And I've been thinking about what has it that's decayed people's willingness to invest in their local community. And I think part of it has been the decrease in transaction costs. In time gone by, it was quite difficult to just pick up and say, oh, that's it. I'm moving to New York. I'm moving to London. I'm moving to Phnom Penh. I'm moving to Tokyo. I'm moving to Melbourne. I'm just going wherever I like. I've got a job offer in Sydney. I'm moving to Sydney. I've got a job offer in Perth. I'm moving to Perth. We take that for granted now. That's not how the world used to be. Transaction costs were high. You were likely going to stay near your local area, your family, your community, where you had built up your local culture. And because you were likely going to stay there, you invested in it. And 20, 30, 40 years later, you still knew that, little Jimmy from around the corner, he's all grown up and he's had kids now. And now he works at the bakery. And you had that culture and community. And I'm not saying I want to reintroduce transaction costs here, but one of the things that I don't think we had fully factored in is as those transaction costs came down, we reduced the incentive to invest in that community. We made it easier for people to just go community shopping. And as we've lost that sense of community, I think some of us have missed it. And I think that's one of the things that's driving some of the pushback against modernity in our modern day.
I agree. It's that yearning for a time gone by. That's why we're seeing all those images of milk bars from the 1970s and kids on BMX bikes, and because there's a nostalgia for that Australia.
Yeah, I got very lucky where I came here. My kids are riding around on BMX bikes. There's kids up the road that come BMXing down here to sell us eggs, and we have like street parties with beers on the corner. So I have found the one place left in Australia that's still living in the 80s, 90s culture.
Yeah.
And no, you can't have it. It's all mine. Anyway, Gene, any last comments?
No, I thought this has been good, John. I liked the discussion. I thought there was some very rigorous economics in tonight's episode, as in addition to all the sort of political commentary, which I thought was good. But I'm certainly not a political commentator. But yeah, I like the economics tonight. So yeah, really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you. It can get a little bit hard to do some of the economics on the fly without a whiteboard, and when it's without a PowerPoint presentation when you're not prepared. That I hope we managed to make some sense out of it. So thank you to everyone who's been listening along. This is Death and Taxes, the podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am John Humphreys. This is Gene Tunny, whichever side he's on. We are here every Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Sydney time, 7:30 p.m. Brisbane time. The rest of the cities can work out the time for themselves. We do this every Thursday. Come and join us next Thursday. And until then, stay safe and stay free.